point when you're thinking about the hours that you're putting in, are they worth it? Do they matter? And at that point in time, they did. We were working so much, and and it's not really. I know there's a lot of backlash with like hustle culture and that sort of thing, but from my perspective, it's a lot of work. I don't know what to tell
Mhm.
folks. I mean, maybe some people can navigate this situation without putting in a lot of time, but I mean, I worked hellish hours.
All right, let's do this. As I was saying, I've been really, really wanting to get on a show for quite some time. I think you've been really, to me, man, a big inspiration for podcasting, for content. And I know a lot of people might not like listen to podcasts or be kind of following your work, but generally, like how you structured motion, how you've kind of grown that brand, how you've grown a lot of the work you've been doing has been generally a huge inspiration for myself, man. So I just say, thank you very much for doing this in the first place. And I know for a fact that, for people that don't know you or anyone that's just listening to the first time, they're going to learn a lot from your experiences.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on, Darren. I see your content all the time on LinkedIn, and it's
Mhm.
always nice to break down that LinkedIn barrier and actually have a conversation. So looking
Yeah.
forward to it today.
Yeah, I remember actually seeing, I think it was your post about like the echo chamber of LinkedIn, how like we can all live within this like small chamber and like we could become siloed and institutionalized from it. And that's why it's good just to, from your perspective, to be creating content on multiple platforms and as well to be showing up multiple platforms, as well to just connect to people on multiple platforms. So
Yeah.
that's what's pretty cool, and you're able to build those relationships. I think that's the beauty of doing a podcast as well and getting that for younger people and even listeners, to get more included with your work and some of the work you've been doing for the last 10 plus years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the fun part. And there are different folks that you meet in different places. Like LinkedIn has its own kind of flavor of
Yeah,
content in the material that's shared there. And I'm very engaged on Twitter as well. And I've met different
cool.
people in different places, but the podcast serves as really this forum where you can bring anyone that you meet in those types of environments and actually have the real conversation and extend some of those exchanges that you've had either on LinkedIn or an environment like Twitter.
Yeah, that's the awesome. Last thing I'll say about like having a podcast is like some of the people I've recorded with, I would have never got in contact with beforehand. It's just given me that new
Yeah.
perspective, met new people, and I just dropped them a message, just like yourself, have a nice chat, might have an intro call, and yeah, it's just cool. It's not about networking; it's just about just meeting cool people. Sometimes, so that's pretty awesome. What I love about the stuff you've been doing and why I became so fascinated with it, especially from when we last spoke, is the fact that your early career was in tech, was completely alien to the stuff you do now. And the idea for today is all around agency and kind of building that kind of business and brand. But when you were young, you were in this kind of tech space. You're working in companies like Oracle, you're working in companies like IBM, which is so uncorrelated to what you do. And it's the same as
Yeah.
me. Like I'm working in a high growth startup, fucking 100 miles away mentally from what I do outside of it.
Right.
Um, like how do you think that kind of like prepared you for what you're even doing and like really like why did you even make the transition because you were doing very well, you're consulting with these firms, you could have done 101 different things, but you made a transition.
Yeah, it's great to look back and reflect like, how you got to this point. And if I rewind even before I got out of school, the one thing that I did know is I wanted to be an entrepreneur at some point. I just didn't know when. And I kind of looked at the beginning part of my career as just an opportunity to get experience as being a
Mhm.
professional. And so when I was in school, I mean, this is when the dot com era was just getting started. Folks, this is before your time, Darren. But we were trying to the turn of the century, the year 2000, and what the hell would happen with all the mainframes and the banking systems and
Mhm.
everything when the clock turned on midnight of that year. And so tech became very prominent at that point in time. And I started out as an economics major, and I shifted into programming, computer information systems, and there were just a lot of opportunities in tech at that point in time. Pretty much every consulting firm was hiring a lot, and then you had a lot of internal teams that were being developed. And so it was just more of striking why the iron was hot at that point in time. And I just wanted to really get a good start in my career with very prominent companies, get exposed to just being a professional,
Mhm.
learning how to present information, how to work in a team, and just trying to understand, what the hell is this real world like? And that was really my goal early on. But I always had this thought in the back of my mind, or this goal, that one day I was going to run my own company. And and like I mentioned, I just didn't know when that time would come along. And really, I got a kick in the butt when my wife was pregnant, and we had our first child on the way. And I feel like you start to see things differently when there's another person coming into your life that you are solely responsible for. And so I just felt that I had to craft an environment that gave me the most opportunity long term, but also would give me the most flexibility to spend with my family. Because
Mhm.
those early days as a consultant, I'm working countless hours, and 12, 14 hours. I even worked the night shift because we were working on in this project management tool, and you could only had one person in the tool at one time changing the records in the database. And so we had to work around the clock, and I
Oh
took the
my
night
god.
shift, and yeah, and I was updating and analyzing data, and making sure that we had the right inputs.
They're
And
thankless as well. That's you could be doing that for the rest of your fucking life, man.
yeah, I mean, there's just these things that you see early on, and it's just like it's
Mhm.
very clear at that point that I'm not going to be doing this when I'm 40, 50 years old. And so that, when my daughter came along, that really gave me the kick in the pants. And I actually ventured out as a solo independent consultant, and I actually subcontracted to those larger organizations that I had originally worked for early on in my career. So that was my first venture into entrepreneurship, was just being an independent IT consultant. And then
Mhm.
that opened up doors to then actually create my own other companies that expanded from there.
That's cool because like a lot of people will look at the perspective of, starting your own company and think, oh, well, one, there's risk, but obviously there is. But on top of the risk, that the time effort. So they would have had a counter argument to that and say, oh, well, you're going to be working more and you won't be able to see your newborn child and things like this. So it's cool that you kind of took that first leap. And that concept of contracting is huge in the UK. Not that big in Ireland, but it's huge in the UK as well. People have that flexibility. They earn more. They're able to get more out of it, I suppose, and they can work on a 3-month contract or 6-month contract. So
Yeah.
it's a nice kind of happy medium. And I think you were in a good position because you had what at that stage 5 to 7 years experience. You were able to dictate that. And I think for younger people, they get into those positions that you were saying they're working long hours for, fuck all thanks, no better word to say it,
Hmm.
and they feel stuck because they don't have other alternatives. Because if they looked
Yeah.
at other companies, they're kind of young, they may not be moving on the right time. They feel this is the general consensus that they should spend more time, get more experience. And at that point, then it becomes kind of uncomfortable. You end up being someone like myself who's 24, 25, who feels quite stuck and doesn't have those opportunities. And then I get the argument then as you got older, you actually had a child, so it felt like you had lost opportunities. But it's
Yeah.
kind of perspective, though, isn't it? It's like where you stand in that perspective kind of realm.
It is, and you mentioned something that I think is important. It's very easy to get stuck, and that's something that uh, people don't really understand until you're like in there in that environment, because you can waste just a lot of time working a lot of hours. And I really feel like what it comes down to is, do you feel like the work that you're doing matters? And for me, I didn't feel like it really mattered much. I wasn't really having that impact in my firstborn child coming into the world. It was something that really allowed me to take a step back and just kind of view things from that perspective. And I think there are different actions or different events where this can trigger someone to take a step, further. Maybe it's um, maybe you have a parent that passed away, and you're just trying to understand, like, what does your long-term vision look like. There are all these different events that, as you talk to more entrepreneurs, there are these triggering events that actually
Mhm.
give them the kick in the butt to take that extra step and say, okay, I'm actually going to go from thinking about running and building my own company, and now I'm actually going to do it. I'm going to go through the pain and the steps involved to actually make it happen. And I just think that's one of the most fascinating things to explore with business owners is the when. You know, when did you
Mhm.
know you were going to go in that direction and change uh, the course of your life and go down that path.
Yeah, like that's crazy because like a lot of people, they will try to be proactive rather than reactive. So like if you, well, a lot of people try to be actually will actually be reactive, but if you're trying to take a first step on this and not be kind of, caught in those situations whereby you lost your job and you have no second income or you're really stuck and you have to go and make those drastic decisions. That's kind of where you don't want to be because you're at that point then where it's like I felt like I need to go make an actual change. But
Yeah.
going back to your point about like doesn't matter, like that's so important because I had a post with this recently about how like there's kind of suffering and there's pain and pretty much whatever we do. Like there's going to be something, whatever you want to do is very difficult. Even doing nothing is difficult. If you wanted to, because,
Yeah.
take it easy if you're at 20s, that's also difficult. You don't have the financial support. Your friends are doing stuff. You can't just, piss away your life at the same time. That's also challenging. So trying to find the right battles to fight, I think, is just so important because yourself in those big companies, myself, my last previous company, even in my own company, you're fighting these struggles all the time. And it's about really like, does it actually matter? Now, I try to
Mhm.
think about it from perspective of like, how does this benefit me long term? Love what I do. I love the concept of building software, and I love that kind of like the product focus. But again, I do that because of the fact that I kind of like the idea of doing it potentially for myself full time, potentially creating my own kind of products, potentially solving customer pain issues. This is what I actually could kind of enjoy. But when you're in the middle of it, you're often not really thinking about how difficult it is or really the purpose of why we're doing anything beyond obviously the money aspect because we need to provide for family. We need to do that. But then there's an extra bracket then of why are we doing anything at all?
Yeah, and when you ask yourself that question, I really think it could be like a perspective thing too. Um, it's like, am I working these long hours? You know, what am I actually getting out of it long term? And it sounds like you're asking some of those questions too sometimes. And I remember there was a big proposal we were working on for the U.S. government, huge agency, and we were in the RFP, like the responding to the RFP at that particular time, and we were running these things called conference room pilots. They're basically like a week long demo, essentially, is what it is, where you go through very specific requirements with the US government and you're trying to demonstrate does the solution that you're providing out of the box, how you configure it, does it meet their very specific requirements? And we worked for months for this in-person demo and it was so much work. We were pretty much sleeping at the office. I mean, we would leave at 10, 11 o'clock. We were staying at a next hotel right next door. I wasn't going anywhere, but with
Yeah.
like in this small half-mile radius. And when we were working on this project, I just said to myself, this is hard work. I don't want to do this forever, but this is invaluable experience that I'm getting right now. I'm working with partners in this organization, and these are senior leaders that I just need to be aware of how they do certain things. I need to pick up little nuances of being a
Mhm.
professional, and that's what I try to absorb as much as possible. I knew that at some point in time, I'm not going to be doing this for the rest of my life, but I need to take as much as I can from this and actually make it an opportunity for myself, and then find another way out to take these experiences and apply it to something that I build on my own.
That's literally like so helpful because when you're looking at those micro moments of just like absolute pain, and that's a great example where people sometimes don't look at the benefit of why they're doing it. You were looking at that RFP thinking this is a big client, this is a big proposal. I could potentially do this more for myself someday and essentially make that cash for yourself. Now I guarantee you that proposal was very similar to the next proposal you did when you went out on your own. You draw those similarities and you try to learn from them and bring them into your own business. So even when you were working in tech and then you go off and do an agency, they may seem a world apart, but there's a lot of similarities, which
Yeah.
is pretty cool. So you bring them across, and I think that's why it's interesting because a lot of people I talk to as well who are in the finance space and like say they're the product space within finance, whenever they're leaving to build something, I always say, look, you don't have to just do it within the world of finance. You can be completely uncorrelated. You could go into healthcare, you could go into pretty much anything, fitness or whatever, and build these type of products because you've learned it for one industry. You can move it across, and any sort of gap, you can fill the gap after a while, you know, bit
That's
of
right.
research. And I think that's what gives you the good opportunity of those kind of broad line skills and what you're kind of bringing across, you know. What's really cool there is you're saying with the transition. So when you were deciding to actually make that transition, how difficult was it? Do you think it was a bit kind of straightforward, or when you decided you wanted to make a move, like why did you actually want to move away then at that point? When did it become the point where you're like, okay, I'm ready?
Yeah. So when I became an independent consultant, I viewed that as an opportunity to just create my own company, like just some of the mechanics involved, like literally creating an LLC, you know, a business
Hmm.
entity, a business of one. Like how do I go and structure, you know, the paperwork? How do I register this with the state that I'm living in? I mean, what does that even entail? And so I took an opportunity to really just use that as a way to just figure out how to set everything up. You know, how do I get QuickBooks in place? How do I invoice this prime contractor that I'm subcontracting to? You know, what insurance do I need? There were just so many things involved. And I said, if I'm by myself as a, you know, solo consultant, independent consultant, I'm only really worried about myself at the moment. So let's use that as a stepping stone. And that's what I did. Got everything involved. You know, I figured out how to bring in an attorney to review my contract and make sure I understood everything that was involved there. I negotiated, you know, my hourly rate at the time and how long that contract was in place for. I mean, that was
Hmm.
interesting to just get that in place. So there was just so many things that you learn just making that switch that are very valuable just long term. And so I made that switch because it was very uh I mean, it was a good financial opportunity for me because I was an
Of course.
employee at these large organizations, but then I was going off on my own. So I basically cut out the middleman. I had very specific expertise in this particular area that was important to the project. And I had already worked on the project for a while. So I had kind of the skill set as well as just the knowledge on the customer side. And I had the trust built. And so, you know, that really worked to my advantage there for that first stepping stone to becoming an
Mhm.
entrepreneur.
It's funny as well, all the steps you were taking there, but you know, setting up your finances, they're all the boring shit that no one actually anticipates.
Yeah.
And they're like things that people don't even think about. You know, they don't think about that. And I'm the exact same with mine, you know, one-to-one basis. Like, how do you manage all this stuff when it comes in? Like, how do you do invoices? How do you even set up these bank accounts? And people don't anticipate it. Maybe at first you may not need to know all that stuff, but that's really like the admin stuff is sometimes the most challenging and
Yeah.
to keep it, especially as a solo business owner. Um, and you did it at a time before you had places like Fiverr that could come in and give you a hand with this stuff. You know, you could outsource a lot of your, not obviously your financials, but a lot of the admin stuff could have been done like that.
Oh yeah. There's um so many things out there, tools and resources for individuals to create their own company now that it was much harder back in the day. And I sound like this old man, right? Where it's like it was much harder. You know, kids these days can create
Yeah,
anything, but it was true. The internet was not as open and it was not as resourceful as it is now. I mean,
yeah,
you can really
definitely.
yeah, you can work with anyone all over the world
Yeah.
and that just wasn't available then. So you did have to kind of fumble through and go through those growing pains yourself.
Even think of like e-commerce as a great example. Like as in early 2000s, you'd have to hold the product, store the products, create a website, create the server, do all this stuff, have terrible upkeep. Now you can just plug in the Shopify, have a lot of things outsourced. You can do, you know, drop shipping or Amazon FBA, but the pillars are in place for you to take advantage of. And all it is margin at the end of the day. Then your margin decreases because you have all these other kind of outsourced partners. And that's why it becomes very helpful. And that's why I do think it is the best time possible to do things yourself. Same with a lot of the, you know, consulting work. Even when you started doing your one-to-one kind of consulting work at the time with clients, like now you just need a landing page. You're probably familiar with Justin Welsh, who discusses this in length on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. A lot of the work he would just say is that at the end of the day, once you have a bit of an audience, get a landing page, a booking invite in your calendar, and a couple of warm leads as it is, you know, and imagine how difficult it was for you to kind of get those inbound opportunities versus now, whereby social media is designed to create leads for you.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like it's almost rolling back to that time in many ways, though, because
Mhm.
I got that contract just through relationships and people that I had worked with on various projects, and those opportunities opened up because of how I performed in my previous roles. And so you just maintain those connections, and that was always important to me, was just keeping up with people. And I didn't even have like a personal CRM at the time, but I just had like a roster of people that I built relationships with. And every once in a while I would just go through and I'm like, oh, I haven't, I'll use the name Jimmy, but I haven't reached out to Jimmy or Mary in a while. I'm just going to send out an email, see how they're doing, see what they're up
Mhm.
to, what project are they on, what's exciting in their, professional lives right now. And I think just going through some of those steps and having some practice there, just getting into that, recurring process to where, hey, it's important to reach out to people and just stay in
Definitely.
touch, see what's important to them, and I've just tried to keep doing that.
It's building the muscle to anything. When you're starting a podcast as well, or doing anything, building the muscle of whatever that task may be. If it's creating content or doing outbound messages, get into it. You get the habit of it. Break that habit cycle after 14 days or 21 days, and then you're kind of on track. And I often feel that when you get plugged into something like this, whether it is like a side business or whatever, if you do it for so long, it almost feels weird to not do it, even if
Yeah,
it's an hour a day. Like when I get really fucking busy, and if I can just do 30 minutes a day, like look at upcoming sessions and check that there's posts coming out and just small things like this, check the designers like doing stuff or whatever, just touch base, see things are still moving in the right direction.
yeah.
Um, that's what's great. But obviously, there's a steep learning curve at first, and there's no doubt about that. Just like when you started, so let's say when you first started your 5-2, was it 522 Productions? Is that how it's pronounced?
We call it 522 production, but
522.
yeah, that was it.
So
Yeah.
that was your first like proper kind of agency business, and that's when this was your video conferencing, your video content business, correct?
Yeah, video production, and it was started about the same time that YouTube came around,
Oh man,
and yeah,
you
it
just
was
caught
way
that
back in the
wave.
day. Yeah,
But that's it
yeah,
though, it's that wasn't a habit either, or wasn't
yeah,
a fluke. You pretty much caught it at a right time. Which is unique, it's unique and brilliant at the same time. But there's people the same that got onto that kind of podcast hype, or could be anything, but it's at that particular time, which is really cool. When I was looking at some of this, I thought it was really interesting. I was reading some of the work you done on it, and you said that you're working in all functions of the business, including sales, marketing,
yeah.
HR, legal, ops. What else
That's
was there?
right.
There was finance in there as well. That's what happens, I suppose, at the very beginning. Is it like when you're starting these agencies, like you're in the shit of it of every aspect of the business.
Yeah, you're in everything, and that role, because I my first venture into entrepreneurship was that independent consultant role. But yeah, this
Mhm.
was my first agency, and I created it. It was weird. I was an entrepreneur um, on the project, but then I was building this other business on top of that at the same time. And back then we called it moonlighting. So I would work really, and this is where the name came from. We would work our full time jobs from 9 to 5, and then freelance or work on our agency from 5 to 2 a.m. in the morning. So that's where the 5 to
Fuck.
2 came. So it was really from 9 to 2 in the morning, essentially, is what our days look like.
Oh my god.
But back to the earlier point, when you're thinking about the hours that you're putting in, are they worth it? Do they matter? And at that point in time, they did. We were working so much, and and it's not really. I know there's a lot of backlash with like hustle culture and that sort of thing, but from my perspective, it's a lot of work. I don't know what to tell
Mhm.
folks. I mean, maybe some people can navigate this situation without putting in a lot of time, but I mean, I worked hellish hours, and
Mhm.
but some of those hours were at home. I had my newborn child. I mean, I was able to go see her at night, when she would wake up and she was crying, and if I would get her back to sleep, I would just I'm up anyway. I would
Yeah.
do some things really late at night. My wife is sleeping and she's staying home, and it was just one of those things where all the hours kind of blended together, and
Mhm.
nights turned into days, but you just felt like everything that you were doing, you were chipping away at something, you were building something, and that's just really what kept me going. And yeah, the 522 productions piece was the first agency, and that's where we started out, me and a business partner, and it was right around the same time YouTube came out. And my involvement there was because of my technical background. At that point in time, you couldn't get video on the web very easily. You had to build these Flash applications. And Darren, I
Flash
don't even,
player.
yeah, do you even know what Flash is? I don't even know. Because
Barely.
Apple killed Flash. But back then you had to develop really these mini applications that would sit, in a frame, so that the browsers could render the
Fuck,
Flash
man.
application. And so we would produce the video content, and then I would develop these little applications that would allow customers actually distribute the video content online. And that's how we really got started. And then we just kind of built it step by step from there. And there are a lot of little things that happened along the way, till we got to the point I exited. But I mean, you're just learning so much every day. You're drinking from a fire hose.
100%. And the best way to learn is when you're literally balls deep in it,
Yeah.
Going back to some of the workload before we go into the content. So, when you're devising this mission, and you have a wife at the time or your partner, and you're thinking like, this is what I need to do, this is the requirement, and this is what's going to happen. Were you able to like extrapolate, how much you could potentially earn, and let's say like, potentially walk away from your day job? Like, was there always that thing in your head? Because even for me, sometimes I could look at it and be like, if I had 4 clients, I'm making more than what I make in a day. And then I'm thinking, well, if I need 4 clients and I need more people, like there's all those kind of trade-offs, But were you crystal clear, or were you really just pissing in the wind, just trying to figure it out, trying to pick up more business and let it grow from there?
I think I was always pissing in the wind. but yeah, I think it to the fact that I did have some goals in mind, some financial goals. So the one good thing is when I did go the independent consulting route, I mean, it was highly lucrative at that time. And I took a really big pay jump, and I did that for a couple of years as I was building the business on the side. So I was just really smart with the money at that point in time, because my wife also stayed home. So she was a teacher, but we knew that when we started to have children, we wanted her to stay at home. So I had that extra weight as well on me, because I knew her salary wasn't going to be a part of the equation either. And we came from families that weren't necessarily well off. I mean, when we got married, we had like $1,000 in our bank account, and we were paycheck to paycheck essentially. So we literally built from scratch. And our parents didn't give us $100,000 to buy our first home. I mean, we bought our first home with like a couple $1,000s down, and financed 99 point whatever percent of it. And so I put goals in place to figure out, okay, here's what we can comfortably live on and provide. And then we also need to reserve money for a cushion, so that, at some point in time I can make that leap and actually go full time into the agency, and really start to build that company in a more accelerated fashion, right? To where that can actually be a company. Because I knew on the consultant side, I had no desire to create a larger consulting firm with other consultants and just continue to do that work. It was just a means to do something more fun and more just more dynamic and more modern, and just really create something in a brand new space. So there was some things I put in place. It's back to your original question is, what did you figure out, financially, when it would be a good fit? And I had those things kind of pegged from the very beginning. And once the agency got to a certain point, and once I had enough money saved up, I felt comfortable. There was certainly a lot of risk with any jump that you take, but I just, felt comfortable. There was enough momentum going. I had enough cushion that, hey, I'm going to go ahead and make this leap. And that's what happened.
Yeah, I suppose it does come at that inflection point as well, because there's only so many hours in the day. And if you're working till 2 o'clock in the morning, obviously it's not sustainable to our original point. And then you need to have that inflection point to say, this is the time I can go take that leap, What's kind of interesting as well is like, when you go to the agency, so you were like a solo contractor, consultant, and it was kind of on you. And then you did the agency with your business partner. So like at that point, does it become an agency straight away because it's 2 of you? Or did you always have in mind to bring in more people and have multiple people because maybe that's what you needed to bring on more clients? Because I think what a lot of people's concerns is the fact that they can do it on a one-to-one basis, freelance, kind of, small kind of side cash. But then when you make the leap and really leverage up all the other stuff, that's where people don't have the experience, don't have the knowledge, don't have the background then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question because I feel like depending on what your expertise is, dictates whether it's a true agency or not from the beginning. Like on the video production side, we always viewed it as an agency from the beginning because just when you go out and you do live production, you can't just go with 2 people. I mean, sometimes we would need an 8 or 10 person team. So we had to build just relationships in the industry and have people like on hand to fill certain specific roles. And I was not an expert in capturing video content on site. I wasn't a cinematographer. I didn't have that background. That was my business partner. He had that background. And so when we came together, I kind of filled all those different roles on the business side.
You did all the shit ones.
Yeah, exactly. And then,
Where the money is, man.
working on
Doing
the
the shit stuff.
content. But you're kind of thrown into that. So I had to
Yeah.
figure out that part of it too. And as did he on the other side. My partner had to figure out the business aspect, which he wasn't familiar with at all. So we were kind of just both trying to figure out, fill in the gaps with our skill sets and try to become a well-rounded entrepreneur. But from the very beginning, we would have to find good resources to fill certain roles. And, whether that was a designer, motion graphics artist at the time, video editors to help us out on projects that just had extensive footage in place. Just at that time, we're filming on tape. And we converted to digital shortly after we created the agency, but you have so much footage that you capture. You have to log it, capture it, write time codes, transcribe things. It was just a lot of manual effort at that time.
I say the difference in work at that time compared to now is absolutely crazy. Well, the workload itself, obviously, because the cameras are so dynamic now, like you just, even my Sony is great. I can find it, put it over my laptop, find any place I want.
Yeah.
But also the other side of it, like, so all of your editors and all the people that came with it, would have been so expensive at the time for someone who's just building an agency. Whereas now you could do a lot of stuff that I even do is that we'd have an offshore team that would do a lot of the editing, a lot of the graphics, and it would all work in tandem, and it's a lot easier because I suppose they're designated teams. So yeah, it's just a different time, and it's much more challenging that way, So you had all the problems plus 1,000 as well at the same time.
Yeah, you couldn't even. So now on the video production side, you can work with anyone in the world, like you mentioned. Back then, you could only work with someone that was a mile or two away. I mean, I'm in a metropolitan city. Yeah, I'm in like Washington, D.C. And if you're not within a 10-mile radius of the city, it takes an hour and a half to get there. So you're dealing with a talent pool that is in such a small area, and you can't transfer footage over the web at that time. That we're talking about gigabytes of footage literally cannot be transferred. You have to be on site. So if someone could not make it into the office to edit on a computer that we had, the shit didn't get done. They would have to come back tomorrow. Whereas now, you can transfer footage pretty much for any project that you have. We do a lot of that where if, we film for days and days, you can get everything up in the cloud overnight and someone can download it on the other side by the morning. And that's for days of footage. And that was just not possible back then.
And it's so funny as well because you're not even factoring the cost, man. Like you haven't even considered it. You haven't even brought up the cost. Because why I said that is because my partner does a lot of video work, a lot of online content as well for clients, like B2B, and it's a great model. It's all around it's like fitness content for brands, but it's so funny because she has so many different Google accounts and uses Google's free storage of 15 gigabytes. She has like 12 accounts. And every account you log in, she's like, why am I paying for more storage? I'm like, you cheap fuck. I'm like, you can just do it all in one go.
Do you know what I paid when? Yeah, it's like every hard drive was like $1,000 at that time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then she can just remove it. They download it. She removes it. She's like, it works. I'm like, it works. But I don't know, is it like the way you should be doing it, But it's funny. It's a different time. And that's why, like, if you are interested in doing it, it's the best time, That's what I always say with a lot of this stuff. I want to get into some of the detail on like the agency dynamics. So some of the inbound opportunities, some of the client stuff that you worked on. So let's kind of get into the client stuff at first. So people always say, getting clients, getting the opportunities is often the most challenging, especially it's more probably the most worrying. It's what people kind of would probably stress about the most, is being able to get those inbound leads. For you early in the days, and especially now, how do you think that that's kind of changed? We have social media now. I don't do any marketing myself, but I get a decent lot of inbound opportunities. Some of them could go nowhere, majority of them go nowhere, but some of them work out. For you, how do you kind of think about those kind of opportunities and be able to scope them out?
It's so interesting to look at how we've generated opportunities, from my previous agency to now. And in many ways, not much has changed. And then in many ways, a lot of shit has changed. But if I go back to how we grew the first agency, we were local to Washington, D.C. area in the United States. And I just became an expert in local SEO at the time and pay-per-click advertising. None of our competitors even knew what the hell those things were. These were really antiquated video production companies that were doing really a lot of political ads in the US. So a lot of folks that are running for office would just hover around DC, and they would film all of their content there. And so a lot of the production industry in DC really relied heavily on the political side of things. So when a lot of these TV spots where, one senator's throwing shit at the other one, on doing these TV spots back and forth, you have all these production companies that are creating these commercials literally daily, right? They're filming stuff, they're cutting it, they're getting it to TV stations, and all the other work on the corporate side, nonprofit side, tech companies, these production companies were too busy. So we ended up filling in the gap there. We decided we're not going to do any of the political stuff. We're going to fill the gap that exists out there. And so we used local SEO, which is basically like, we are a Washington, D.C. video production company, and we did pay-per-click advertising. And that's really how we grew, because there just wasn't a lot of competition on that first page in Google at the time. And that changed a lot. People caught us, they caught wind of what we were doing, how we were growing, and we got more competition, of course. And then we had to branch out and then try to find other ways to just build opportunities. But I would say along the way, referrals were always a big thing too. So we would do a lot of what we call spec projects to build relationships. So sometimes if we and I would encourage a lot of people to do this, whether you're an independent consultant or you're a small agency, find small projects or people that you want to work with and do the shit for free. I know people say don't do free work, but I've done this my whole career where, I just find someone that I really respect, and I provide an idea and say, hey, here's something that we want to do. And you draw like a really good line around it, and you provide those parameters, but you say, I'm going to do this for you. I don't really need anything in exchange other than maybe you talk about your experience working with us at some point in time. That's all I'm looking for. And then you get to work with someone that you really respect, and you get to learn on that project. You get the final product. So we would actually create video content for someone who we really respected, or an organization we really respected, and we would use it as marketing collateral. And we could talk about that project, and no prospects would ever say, did you get paid for that? I mean, they would never ask the question. And some of the best stuff that we had in our portfolio was completely free. And it's because we had creative freedom to do exactly what we would want. That is also one of the things that would be a condition. It's like, hey, if we work on this together, it's not going to cost you anything, but we want to do it our way. We wanted to do it this way. And we would always take an opportunity to maybe practice a new technique. Maybe we're putting a camera on a dolly for this, and we want to showcase that, or maybe we're doing some steady cam shots, or maybe we're doing some different types of design or filming styles or compositions. They're all these different things that we wanted to test. And a lot of times when someone's paying you for a project, they don't give you that opportunity, because they
100%.
want it done a certain way, and you're working within, this very small box. And so that's something that we did to build relationships there to really just help on the marketing side as well.
I love that. I think the free approach is incredible to get those referrals, get a client kind of portfolio, and more so than anything, get experience. So I do a bit of a one-to-one, well, a bit more than one-to-one. We do kind of like small projects with brands for podcasting as well. I know you kind of do an all-for-one kind of package where you build it out. We do a combination of both, but not as much as you, let's say. More so kind of graphics, marketing, that kind of stuff on the marketing side.
Yeah.
But before I did that, June last year, I just rang up everyone that I knew that had a podcast, and I was like, "Can I just help you for a bit?" I didn't
Hmm.
even ask for any referrals. I just said, "Can I just help you?" And we just talked through some things you're going through. And a lot of them I would have done at the start of my podcast, which again is nowhere near the size of some of the other guys that I've been working with, which is even funnier. But I
Yeah.
would have just like walked through some scenarios, and they would have not been getting kind of outbound opportunities. They may not have been getting the reach, let's say, or their graphics are repetitive. And I was like, oh, same. I had a lot of these issues too. Did that for so long. And then I was like, okay, I think that it's good enough to a standard to now do it on a paid basis. So
Yeah.
I didn't go back to them asking for money. Left it at that, closed it out, happy days. That's when I started just using some of the content to say, oh, look, we've been working with these places, and yeah, it was great because it gave me confidence, and I think that's what was more important. Because I hate using the word imposter syndrome, but that's kind of is what it is. It's like you feel that you're not, you don't have the validation that you're ready. And especially for you when you're trying out new technology or doing different types of video, you may have felt at the time that it wouldn't have been good or whatever. But when you have a bit more freedom, creativity freedom, yeah, you can walk away. And I actually had a very interesting scenario with that as well recently. It was someone who wanted to set up a live environment,
Yeah.
and I mean now the Shure MV7, all those types of cabling, all the kind of cloud converter boxes and stuff. I had no experience doing it, absolutely none. I remember I sat back and I was like, I literally do not know what I'm going to do here. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, if I do it once and if I can do it, I can always do it afterwards. Then it's just going to
That's
take
right.
me 6, 8, 10 hours over the course of a couple of days to figure this out. But once I do figure it out, a really good in-person production, that's it. Just do it once. Did it
Yeah.
once, threw it all into a drive, step-by-step process. And I was like, thank God it's out of the way. But it's done. And I think that's what people kind of would maybe potentially put themselves a bit short and say that they're not ready to do stuff because maybe they haven't figured out all the different aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny when you say you do something for free, like if you're on Twitter a lot, people are like, always get paid for your work, blah blah blah. But there are different ways to compensate, and it's just more about creating a good exchange, I guess, in my view. Where you're working with someone you respect, and you're going to learn something, they're going to get something out of it, and you just need to be very clear as to what it looks like from the beginning. It's like any project, really. If you have a lot of gray lines and the requirements aren't very detailed to where both sides know what's coming out of this engagement, then you're going to have trouble regardless of whether you're being paid for it or not. So
Mm.
it's just something that we try to build something that's fair to both sides. And on our side, it's more valuable just to get that portfolio piece, that work experience, and to try something new.
Hmm. Definitely, definitely. When you got a little bit bigger and you were trying to bring on more people, what were some of the challenges you had when you were hiring? Hiring is, usually is quite difficult to begin with.
Yeah, I saw that question that you sent over earlier, and I was like, I don't even know where to start with that one. So I failed in so many ways hiring. It's one of the hardest things to do, I think, in any
Mm.
business. And I interviewed and hired people as a consultant. I would interview consultants to see whether they can come on a project or not. I did it when I was building my company, and it's something that uh, is just very hard to figure out if someone is going to be a fit with just like 2 30-minute conversations. It's really hard. The biggest thing that I did on the creative agency side is we tended to do projects, paid projects with people first. And I think on the agency side, there were more opportunities to work with freelancers up front. It's just more common than what you saw in the IT industry. Like nobody really did like a small piece of work to test out. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
I want this hourly rate, and I want a year contract, and that's what I'm doing. And it's like,
Mhm.
damn, is this person the right fit or not? But when I was, on the creative agency side, and we're developing video content, we could always craft out a project and say, hey, we need to fill in this gap. We need some editors down the road. We got a lot of projects. We're going to have to probably hire someone full time in maybe a month or so. So let's bring someone in maybe 1 to 2 days a week. Let's have them work on some of these low risk projects. Let's see what the intangibles look like. Are they organized? Can they
Mm.
follow instructions? Can they set up a project in Adobe Premiere? Or at the time we were using Final Cut. Can they set up a project like we set up a project? And can someone else come in and pick up their work and actually make sense of it? And so that's what we did a lot of times to eliminate those risks with full-time employees. We would try to bring someone on, scope out a project, and figure out if they're a fit from there.
It's great because a lot of people will not be able to capture the full personality in the 30 minutes, the next
Yeah.
30 minutes of an interview. And I think it's the non-verbals, like when they're setting up the project or they're trying to do things like this that are more the kind of personality based versus can you do it? Because I suppose
Yeah.
in your field or even in my field in like fintech, more so like they'll be able to edit the video, they'll be able to create the content, be able to record the video, but it's all the other stuff that comes with it, like the commitment, the fit with the team. And I think that's the real challenge, and that's where you pretty potentially screw up a business, isn't it? Because if you have so much dependency
Yeah.
and on a single person, I always see that in the startup field as well. Like last couple of companies I was with, they have so much like single man, like essentially just pressure. Everything's centered around one person. That person
Yeah.
leaves or whatever. And I can even tell you, my own story. I had one of our main designers, a brilliant guy. I think he's honestly probably made over 1,000 designs in the last 15, 16 months. He felt that he was getting requirements too late, like that
Mhm.
the client was submitting stuff way too soon to things being launched, and it put him under too much pressure. And he wanted to leave. He wanted to finish up. And then you're at that axiom, then being like, okay, does this person actually want to leave, or is he just pissed off with the flow of information? And then what I will try to do then was work backwards. Was like, how do we fix this problem? Speak to the client, tell them that we needed things to be delivered potentially a week in advance, up to a week in advance, and then he'll have time to split this work out. But I
Yeah.
thought that happened recently as well, only a couple of months ago, and it was that example which made me think like, okay, what's important? Protecting the people that are within my circle. That's what's
Yeah.
most important here for success.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, working with creative folks, it's always a challenge because, um, you know, you- they, and I'm a creative person too. I always want more time, and on the financial side, sometimes you can't have an infinite amount of time. So it's always a struggle. You want to do high quality work, but you also have these time constraints, and I feel like that's just, as an agency owner, you're always navigating that challenge, and that's just part of the
Mhm.
deal, where you're trying to do the best work you can within, a certain price, and you're just trying to balance that equation constantly.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. One
What's
of the
the
last areas I wanted to
real
do.
quick, Darren? What's the triangle? It's speed, quality, and price.
It's it's the is that it?
Yeah, so like you can get something cheap and fast, but it's going to be shit quality, or
Okay.
you can get something high quality. It's going to take a while
Hmm.
for an average price, and if you pay a lot for high quality, it's going to take a long time. So it's like
Hmm.
trying to balance those three things, that three-legged stool.
But what's cool though, like an example of like your company Emotion is the fact that for anyone who doesn't know, like a lot of the work you do for launching podcasts and for doing it for B2B companies, you'll do set pricing. And that's what I actually really love. When I checked out your website, it was really cool to see that you do a set structure. And I even want to ask you, and like just super briefly, is like, why is it set? Because a lot of people will do the opposite. They'll, leave it open, they'll have a rough scope, and then they'll add on more things, bring you down the sales funnel. You're so far down the sales funnel, then they'll slap you with a massive cost, and that's usually how it works.
Yeah.
Why is it for you to find price up front?
It is super important for us to do that up front. And I feel like it's one of the biggest changes I've made that's had one of the biggest impacts on my business because um, if we roll back to a lot of the conversation we've had around on the video agency side with my first company, and that's even how Motion came to be as well. I mean, we basically replicated the same model I had before, a project-based company where every inbound lead that came in or every opportunity that we generated required a custom proposal, which mean
Mm.
which meant that we needed a salesperson. And so in the early days, it was me. I was doing all these proposals myself, custom proposals, and I built a system for it. But
So
when we started to grow, which is how I met my current business partner, Motion, Justin Brown. I hired him as our head of sales in my previous agency, and I brought him in to grow a sales team. So we had a 4 or 5 person sales team when I exited the company, and we had to figure out a system to develop those proposals. But everything was so unique. Every project was so specific, and it was just very hard to do that each and every time. Every month, we would start at 0
mm,
in our revenue. Sure, we would have pipeline of opportunities, but you literally start at 0 every month, and you need to land new deals, bring in invoices and revenue, and move forward. And so recurring revenue was always a goal of mine on the agency side, and that's why we totally revamped what Motion put together. And so now our focus is much less on a project and it's much more focused on a long-term relationship. And that's why we develop our packages like we do now. We have a month-to-month agreement. I mean, you can sign up for us and you can cancel if you want. But we love to put our money where our mouth is and say, "Hey, we have to earn, your respect each and every month. Our goal is to have you never leave."
mm.
But we want to give you that freedom up front. But in exchange, we're going to be very clear as to what we provide, and we want to build that relationship. And so when people are coming to us up front, if they're looking, we're not a great fit when someone's like, "Hey, I want to, dip my toe into podcasting. I want to try it for a month." Honestly, we're like, it's probably not going to work, and we are not going to be a fit. You might
Mhm.
find someone else that can help you get it off the ground and try it. You get an episode or 2, and then you'll probably become part of the pod fade that you see in a lot of other cases. What we like to stress up front is that podcasting is a long-term commitment. You can get a lot of short-term results and some impact right away, but you really start to get that compounding effect as you move forward. And so our whole pricing structure really reflects that mentality, and it's really worked out well for us.
I love that, man. I love that approach because from a MRO perspective for you, that's what you're ultimately aiming for. That's what ultimately I'm aiming for as well, to be honest, is to understand that longevity play and having like reoccurring elements coming through your portfolio. But from a client perspective, that is more important than anything else. That relationship, find that right relationship with someone and being able to work with someone. And you know straight away. I think when you open up the Zoom call for me now at this stage, you know
Yeah.
when it's a good fit or not. You know when someone's looking to kind of take shortcuts, and that's okay. They might be taking shortcuts because they're so busy on fucking generating revenue and building a
Yeah.
SaaS company or building an e-commerce company. So their priority is slightly different. But it's almost like, okay, but my ambitions and goals in this company is different than what yours are. And I
Yeah.
think being able to understand that and maybe potentially not take on a client is way more valuable than taking on something and it not working out, and I think I've had very similar examples of it recently, thinking in my head, being like, from a financial perspective it's good, but really, is this going to work? Because the thing with agency is the fact that you work so closely with them. Maybe you might have a touch point once a week, you maybe have more, you might have
Hmm.
less, but because of that, it's an ongoing thing. It's not necessarily like, you build a product online and they subscribe to it like a SaaS model. It's not like that.
Yeah.
You don't mind who's the person on other exchanges. So find that relationship is very key, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the big thing is trying to craft a model to where you can do something each and every month. And that was the tough part on the video side. We tried to crack that nut in a lot of different ways where, okay, well, let's provide video content each month and we'll kind of, qualify it with some specific deliverables or whatever. We'll do one shoot a month or something. We tried a lot of different things. It just didn't work out really well because people always viewed videos as a project. You know, like a CMO or a marketing director might say, hey, I have to get our animated explainer video done for our new product release. And that's this quarter. You know, it's not something he or she is doing every month. And so that's really where, you know, our business was born out of our own podcast that we created. It's not recorded content, but a previous one that we had. And we just said, this is it. This is the model that will work for our ideal customers. And let's just work with customers to define what they want each month at a baseline level. And on the back end, we have tons of add-on, what we call products. I mean, there's a lot of shit that we do, but we don't muddy it up on our pricing page and say, we can do this. And then we just keep piling shit on top. What we do is say, hey, everyone really needs this to be effective. You know, in these pricing structures are created from conversations with customers and from rolling out shows for tech companies. And we're constantly making little tweaks here and there. And then we also have unique requirements and products on the back end. So once you become a customer, you unlock a lot of other possibilities, like whether it's creating a trailer, an animated trailer, custom intros and outros, voiceover content, like for ads. I mean, there's just a million things that we do on the back end that we just don't, you know, make that distinction up front to make it very confusing for folks.
Yeah, like you often just sell the benefits, not the features. Like people don't want to see those in particular details. Now they are valuable to someone, but maybe not to they're not as valuable to everyone as the benefits are. That's what I like to kind of think a lot of times, you know. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you one last question because I know we're kind of stuck for time. It's my own personal fault. So you've had a lot of experience. You've been working in these tech companies. You've worked in as a contractor. You've worked in your own agency. You've had 2 agencies. You've had 2 podcasts. How for you has been trying to find that kind of passion in your career? So you've been really in the different aspects of it. You think you've kind of trying out different things, or how has been defining it that value for you?
Yeah. Let me think. I think finding my passion is just always trying different things. I think right now I've never been more comfortable with like my role as an entrepreneur. You know, I've always been trying to find my way, and I've never really been satisfied. But I can say now that the way our business model is structured and the work that I'm doing and the customers that I'm working and serving each and every day, I've never really been at a better spot. So it's taking me, a long time if we want to put it under the microscope. I mean, I've been at it for quite a while, but I can say that the entrepreneurial journey is really just the part of the deal. And I always knew that up front. I knew that I was going to go through a lot of pain. And it just reminds me of a conversation I had. I had Andrew Warner on recorded content. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he runs the Mixergy podcast. And I asked him about this question, which was around you need to suffer for what matters. And he talked about how that was so important to him. And that really struck a chord with me because I feel like if you want to go out, create an agency or become an entrepreneur, there is going to be a lot of suffering. And I feel like that's what makes it worth it to you in the long run. And I feel like at this stage of my career, I've gone through so many bumps along the way. You know, I exited my first agency. I sold it to my business partner. Probably wasn't the best conclusion to that chapter of my career, but we had to figure it out. And then, you know, we started Motion, and I brought some folks over to that company, and we started out of the gates hot, but then we also had to restructure our company too. We did not start out as a podcast agency. We were doing video projects, much like I was doing it in my previous company, and we had to completely change it. And that's been incredible. It's been so much fun trying to figure out a model that works well and allows us to sustain growth. Because that's the one thing, Darren, is if you are doing project-based work, cash flow is always going to be an issue because you don't know if that big $100,000 project with a government agency is going to hit next month or 3 months down the road. So it makes it almost impossible to hire the right people. Whereas at Motion, we know if we're bringing on a certain number of customers each and every month, it's compounding because our churn is incredibly low. People come to Motion, they don't leave. And so if we keep people on and we continue to grow, then that opens up a lot of doors down the road because we have predictable revenue. And that really solves a lot of problems on the business side. So my only advice for finding, to wrap this up is you have to try a lot of things and figure out, what you're truly passionate about, because you're not going to hit it out of the park with your first, your first venture into entrepreneurship. At least I did.
100%. It's never going to be a one and done. It's always going to be iterative. And you described the lean startup approach there, constantly fixing, making moves, changing when you need to, and listen to customer feedback. Tristan, I want to say a massive thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you and find Motion?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn, Tristan Pelligrino, and then more importantly, probably to find out what Motion does and how we produce podcasts for tech companies, go to motionagency.io.
Legend. Thank you so much, man.